Thank you. So before I begin, can I have a show of hands of who's a fan of the Star Wars franchise? Excellent. So I work at DICE. DICE is this big games company, and one of the games that we make is Star Wars Battlefront 2. So I'm going to go into a little bit of a story about how we shipped that game, and there'll be some more stuff as well soon. So I'm just going to cover what is it that we're going to learn throughout the talk. So in EA, we've got this concept called time to player. So I'll talk about that. We'll talk about how to ship a game. We'll look a little bit into the value stream map that we have in the company. And then one of the things that I really like to do is front load a bunch of the effort of making games to make things go faster. So what is time to player? So we've got this one idea that might be a prototype, or it might be a new feature, or it might be some new gun or a new map or some kind of cool thing that we want to put in the game. And what we do with that is we've got a whole team of development people, and they might be QA testers, or rendering engineers, or physics people, or any of the different disciplines in the company. And then we've got this sort of prayer area where we sort of hope that everything works, and we polish it and we make it a little bit better, and then everything breaks. And this is where the bulk of the polishing and getting it ready to ship to the players happens. And then we've got it in a player's hand. They're sitting on the couch, and they're able to play the game. So time to player is this process. It's the time to go from the brain into the computers and making art assets and putting it onto a console. And this is really important to EA. So what players want is more content delivered to them faster, right? It's a changing industry away from this big box product game, and then in a couple of years' time, it'll be another game, right? No one really wants that anymore. People want these live service games where there's an update this week that has a new map in it, or there's an update in 2 weeks' time which has a new gun or a new hat or a new place to play, or maybe it's some extra balancing or something else in the game. Yeah, so next I'm going to talk about the patch process, which is how we got from this box product of Star Wars Battlefront 2 and brought it into this weekly patch release cycle. So let's say that we've got this big release, and it's on a disk, and we've shipped it to all the stores, and everyone can take that disk and put it in their PlayStation or Xbox or whatever. All right, so let's just pretend that all that work has happened, and we've got the full game. So the question then is we're working on this second thing. And this second thing might be a new map, or it might be whatever other feature it is that we want to have coming down the line. Maybe it's some new content. So normally what happens is we've got our disk, and we've got that version sort of ready to go, and it's in the shops and all that. And our next version is in development, and it's sort of just being made. So we don't really have it finalized, but it's just in that development phase. So each of these red lines represents a totally distinct area in version control for us. It might be we call them different branches, right? So totally different branch for each red line. But then we realize, oh, hey, that version that we shipped on disk, maybe it's got some problem. Maybe like there's too many people who are not able to like get past an enemy in one area of the game, or like it's too challenging and it's not fun. And we'd have like lots of metrics to back this up. So we would say, okay, we're going to have to do like a hotfix to make people be able to play the game while we're still working on all this content down here that we don't really have ready to ship yet. Like maybe that's scheduled for a couple months down the line. So we make that fix, and we ship it to release. So now the version that people are playing on their consoles is this new version where you're able to actually like get past that level, and everything is looking pretty good. And then we realize, oh, hey, you know, that fix that we needed, like, we now need to take that into our new content that we're making, right? Because we need to have like all those changes that are on people's console. Like, we also want to have them in our next release. We don't want the case where we shipped one thing and then we ship version 2 and it doesn't have that fix that we had, right? So, okay, let's put that into version 2. And this is like a manual process, right? We do some work here, and then we have to redo it over here, or maybe some other things have changed. So, oh, okay, all right. So let's just say that happened. And now release 2.0 is like getting a little bit further along. We're in that sort of prayer area where it's doing like game testing, and you know, it's getting a little bit like more ready to release. But then we find out, like, okay, that bug fix that we just made, maybe that has changed something else, right? Now, too many players are playing like just one special class because it's become overpowered. So maybe we want to do something else, like, okay, maybe now we need to do some rebalancing. And we had this rebalancing thing in version 2, and it's actually ready to go. Like, the thing that we're waiting on in release 2 is like maybe some more art assets, or like a new character is being made, or something else that's not ready yet. But we've got this balancing update that we're, you know, happy with, and that's just like a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet which can be validated. So we say, okay, we've got this thing in version 2, and we've got this problem, so let's bring that into release 1. And we say, okay, but release 1 is live, and release 2 is not live, so we have to do this. We have to do this weird thing. So we do this weird thing, and then we say, oh, okay, now we've got this release 1.2, which is partly release 1.1, and it's partly release 2, and we, you know, we make this new branch, and we do all this stuff, and okay, it kind of works, and we say, well, let's ship that, and now we've got a couple of updates. Our release 2.0 is now a little bit smaller, but it's pretty much ready to go as well. So then we say, okay, you know, we wait for the right time, and we sort of count our blessings. We do a last, you know, we do a last test, and everything was looking good. And then we're like, okay, finally, we can rest. Release 2.0 is out the door. But, you know, we did a lot of weird stuff to get here. So at the start of this, I said each one of these red lines represents a new branch in our version control history. And there's a lot of red lines on this. All right, we've got, like, for each release, we've got a red line going the one way, and then we've got all these weird ones that are coming in from different angles. So let's, like, evaluate this process. Like, maybe we aren't doing things the right way here, or maybe something weird is happening, because it certainly feels weird, and it's not a very pleasant way to work. What So we evaluate the process and we say, okay, this is kind of error prone. We've got like some work doing well over here, and we've got some work over there, and we sort of do this mashing thing, and there's a lot of like figuring it out as it happens. All right, so like it being error prone is probably not the best thing. I'm gonna put a big red X on that just to like evaluate it. Figuring it out as it happens, it's probably not the smartest way to release games. We should probably have a plan in place. All right, that's probably not the best thing. But it's like, the complexity is not too bad, right? It's like, it'll work pretty well if we don't have that many releases. If we're like releasing like a DLC pack, that might take a year or something to come out. So the number of like patches that we're making to fix those bugs is pretty low, and DLC is like takes a long time. So that's pretty good. Like that's okay. But then it's like so much manual effort every time we make one of these packs, and we do this like weird clobbery thing. It's like, oh, okay. There's so much stuff to keep track of that has to be done by a human, right? It's like, was this change made on this update or on this update? Did this one make it down to the next update? Did we bring things back in? Like, it was a pretty weird thing. And in each of those red lines was a release branch. And release branches at DICE and EA are interesting because they require like a whole bunch of different things. They need like a big environment to be set up. We need to have like an area for playtests to happen. We have to do all this extra stuff. And it turns out that took 2 weeks every time we wanted to make one of these new branches. So that's not great either. So this is sort of what we had. And from the perspective of like the sort of legacy games industry, where we're making a box product, and a couple months later, or maybe a year later, we make some DLC pack, this is fine. It works kind of well enough, and there's like enough time for you to do like the whole test cycle and for it to like not blow up in your face. But what if, instead of there being like 3 patches and then another release, like what happens if it's all patches? What happens if we don't want to release once every 6 months? We want to release like every week, or we want to release every day, or we want to release a little small bit of a feature to get that like early cycle, get that feedback loop happening as quick as possible. Maybe this is not going to work anymore. And then if we're looking back, it looks real bad, all right? Because each branch is taking 2 weeks to set up. So if we look back at time to player, we're trying to get that metric of like how fast can we ship features? Well, the minimum is 2 weeks. And that's like assuming that making the content is free. And it's not free. So this is the thing that we really wanted to look at. We wanted to look at this 2-week setup time and see like, this is unacceptable for us because time to player, the absolute minimum is 2 weeks, and we have to do better than that. So a good friend of mine, his name is Miles McGuire, he said this a couple years ago: the fastest way to do something is not at all. So if you just don't do something, it takes 0 time. And you can pretend to not do something and it's kind of the same time, or you can like engineer a way to avoid doing this big setup thing. So we decided like, hey, this release strategy that we had is like probably not the best. Let's just brand that as like the dinosaur way of doing things, and let's come up with a new strategy. So what are the goals for that? Like, what are our like lofty goals, which maybe we might not achieve, but at least we have to try. So we wanted to like minimize the manual effort. The overhead in saying like this change happened here, and then this other change is here, and then like maybe one of those changes is there, but this one like isn't compatible with that one, or whatever. That's not great. Avoid having a branch per release. Like, what if we just had like one release branch, or maybe it's like a set of release branches, or like if we have one whole thing for every release and we want to release like once a week, there's 52 weeks in a year, like lifetime of a game might be like 10 years or something. I mean, I don't know what those numbers are, but they're big numbers. And if it takes 2 weeks every time we set up a branch, like that's just unacceptable. And then the thing that we wanted to really do was like enable weekly patches. Like we want to enable the business to ship the features that our game developers are making, that our content creators are like eager to see in the hands of players. And like you get that feedback, you get that whole loop closed as soon as possible. And then we wanted to have one setup for all releases. So what I described before with the like red lines and the sort of chaos was how we used to ship games. In February, we did this big sort of evaluation that I just described, and we said, let's change the way that we ship games. Let's deliver value to players as fast as we can, or at least let's try. So we came up with this solution for that. In February, we had Star Wars Battlefront 2 that was live. There was a lot of controversy around that, which I don't really want to go into too much. But I think I just did. Whoops. So we had to do like lots of iteration really quickly to make things right with the community. And we've successfully done that. So let me see, in about a month, a little bit, something like that, we're going to be releasing Battlefield 5. And Battlefield 5 is currently under development. It's going to be shipped on a disk, just like the rest of our console games. And we're going to use the same process that we use for Star Wars Battlefront 2 to enable us to deliver quickly. So I'm going to run through that process now. I call it the static infrastructure process, but I mean, they're just words. It could be anything. So we've got release 2. And that's just sitting there, like, let's pretend that that's already gone out. Or in the last diagram, it had gone out. Now it's not. It's in development. Okay? And it moves forward. And we say, okay, release 2 is like, we sort of know what's in that, and 2.1 is some other thing. Let's not worry too much about that. And then, like, as time marches on, like, release 2 is getting a little bit more defined. It's a little bit more polished, and it's pretty much ready to go. So we moved along, and then, like, release 2.1 is behind it, because that's the way that, like, time happens. And release 2.2 is like some other thing. It's like way in the past, or like the future, or whatever way time works. It's in development. Let's say that. And now like release 2.0 is on like the one side of the screen, and it's ready to go. So let's say release 2.0 is ready to ship. Release 2.1 is like right behind it, right? So it's in this almost ready to ship area. And we've got 2.2, which is like whatever that is. And release 3 is like, that's way off. That's like prototypes and features and stuff that we don't really we know yet. So what happens now when we want to move forward a couple days or like weeks or hours or whatever? Well, it just sort of moves this way. So now 2.0 has already been shipped, and 2.1 is like ready to ship. It's ready to go out. It's gone through like the first party certification process, and everyone's looking happy at it. And like if we want to make a hotfix here, we just make it where it is. And the automatic process is that it will go through to 2.2, and then it'll go through to 3.0, and like changes that we make at any point in the branch just go out, well, this way. Like that's the whole pattern here. If I make a change anywhere, it goes from the one side of the screen back this way. And then this is a more accurate picture of what it actually looks like. We've got something that's like live. We've got something that's ready to go live. We've got like 2.2, which is like in that polishing phase, and it's not really ready to ship, but it's also like we know what's going to be in there. Release 3.0 is like we don't really know what that is. We've got a good idea of like maybe it's this map, or like maybe it's this feature, or maybe it's this new character, but we're not totally sure yet. And then like way off in prototype land, we've got feature A and feature B, and we just don't really know if they'll even make it into the game. Maybe that's like a dinosaur map pack, or like a big head mode, or whatever sort of fun stuff that the creative people want to do. And then the way this works is that we ship 2.1. 2.2 then becomes ready to ship. And as we're doing this, we're making fixes, and they're going back, and they're trickling back, and everything's looking good. But then, like, what happens here? Like, we've got these features. I thought they were prototypes, and then we've got this, like, release 3.0, and that's doing, like, whatever it's doing. It's more defined now, and okay, like, where do we go from here? Well, we take those two features, and we just say, we're going to release these ones. So they go like into that pipeline, and they say, okay, we're going to iterate on these, and like maybe the teams on those features will increase, or we'll do that whole polishing thing, and they'll like progress into the whole picture. But then these other features come along, and everyone's got these creative ideas, and like maybe that map pack, or like the dinosaur pack wasn't like the best idea, or maybe it was. So all of these features are something else. And like what's interesting about this whole picture is that it kind of reminds you of this, right? It's like we've got these ideas, and then we've got this coding phase, and then we've got this like polish phase as well. And then on the one side, we've got like the things that have actually made it out to customers, to players. And you can go and play those. So if we apply that on the map, we've got all these ideas on the one side. We've got this like sort of deep coding area where it's no longer a prototype. It's getting somewhere good. And then we've got this polish phase where we're getting everything ready to up to ship. And then we've got something that's ready to ship. And then we've got whatever is actually on people's like consoles, and people can play them. So the beauty here is that the release process, which before was like a bunch of manual stuff that didn't really make sense and was hard to understand and hard to keep track of, the release process now matches the artistic process. And this was like radically different for us. So we wanted to engineer this new release strategy. We wanted to minimize the manual effort, avoid a branch per release, enable weekly patches, one setup for all releases. Release process matches the artistic process. And what I described had like one line going across. So it had one release pipeline. At the start, there was like red lines going like zoom, 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 and each one of those took 2 weeks to set up. At the start of every game project, we set it up once. And that's our release process. And it doesn't matter how many releases we pop into that pipeline and how many come out at the other end, it's one pipeline. Now the setup for that was more like 3 weeks than 2 weeks, but I let myself away with that one. So yeah, the big wins. We've got releases happen when the game team decide. I'm part of the build team. I no longer have to get involved. I don't have to micromanage each release. I don't have to think like, oh, this change happened in one, and we've got this thing happening in like this other feature, and these are conflicting changes. Like, I don't have to do that. It frees up weeks of effort for every single release. The build team can focus on like actually the overall picture, like how do we do like some cool stuff, like maybe we want to use different technologies or some other new cool projects. And the time to player, which is the metric that we had at the start, which is the thing that delivers business value to the company and the thing that delivers value to players, is reduced by 2 weeks for every single release. That's not a lot if you're releasing once every 6 months. If you want to release once a day or once a week, that is absolutely critical. So the lessons that we learned was to use value stream mapping, to map out the entire organization and say, well, we've got these 2 weeks that the build team are doing every single release. It's probably not the best idea. Front load a whole bunch of effort at the start of a project, spend those 3 weeks so that you don't have to spend 2 weeks every single release. Keep your infrastructure static. That's basically what I mean with the release branches. Just don't do that if you can avoid it. And evaluate your processes, which for me is the most important thing here, is evaluate your processes, because we were doing this for years and we just didn't take the time to step back and say, is this the best way of working? And that's me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.